one of the things I've said before on these webinars is that the communications piece is probably the most difficult thing that we do, in that making sure that you feel close to your company, making sure you understand what we're doing, the progress that is going on. It can be quite challenging as well, when you're out there RC drilling and drilling 100-meter holes, as we will be doing in August. It makes the news flow, to be quite frank, very, very simple. And it makes my job easier too. During periods where there's sort of furious activity going on in the background, especially with scoping studies and sort of more desktop-based and field-based geophysics, things like that, it does slow down the news flow. So this webinar is really a way to communicate with you a bit more often, and also to provide you with the opportunity to ask questions. And really, I hope by the end of this, you'll understand what our strategy is and just how much work is going on in the background at the moment, and how, to be quite frank, things are very good at Coda Minerals. And we have a lot of confidence and real energy for what we're doing right now. It's actually quite a pleasant time from a work point of view. There's a lot going on. It's been a difficult time in the market, and I think that's something that, without question, has affected everybody. We compare ourselves internally, just to keep an eye on movements, to about 12 other copper peers, and doing the analysis, 100% of them have lost value since the 1st of July this year. Now, this is baffling to me in a future copper bull market, and so I'll leave you to ponder that. I'll talk to copper a little bit in the future. I'll draw your attention to the usual disclaimer, and I'll also, just as a bit of housekeeping, say that we will not be discussing anything material that has not been unreleased. There is obviously news flow coming over the next period, and we'll run more seminars to discuss any updates along the way. But this is really about providing a high-level strategic view of the company. So in terms of strategy, again, it's fairly simple. We do believe that, whatever your politics, we're moving towards increasing electrification, increasing use of renewables, and in all of those cases, copper is a major part of that. Yes, there are some headwinds at the moment, but I'll talk to my view in terms of what's happening in the copper market and why this is probably an incorrect short-term view, in my opinion. We do believe that we have a major source of ethical Australian copper and cobalt, and over the past little while, I've participated in online meetings with quite a number of groups overseas, primarily the UK and Germany, and you'd be amazed at the reception the idea of ethical Australian copper and cobalt gets. I think we sometimes don't realise just how blessed we are in Australia with the sources of mineralisation that we have. And it's something I find very interesting. And on that note, I will be flying to the UK tonight to undertake roadshows over the next 3 weeks and have an increasingly full diary, which again is a reflection of the interest in Australian copper and cobalt as we move to deliver a scoping study as well. And so with that, talking blessing, we operate in absolutely tier 1 locations. You frankly couldn't get better copper locations than South Australia, Gawler Creighton, and the Mount Isa Inlier of Queensland. And I'll talk to Camera River shortly. This is very, very exciting stuff. In addition to the primary asset, which is and remains the Elizabeth Creek Copper Project, which we now own 100% of. So in terms of progress over the past year, we've put in a JORC resource, 1.1 million tonnes contained copper equivalent, and that, I understand that you know that already. I've said that dozens of times over the past 6 months. A large part of the sort of second part of this webinar, or over the next 10 minutes or so, is going to be talking to what we're doing with it, why this matters, why it's important, why I'm actually excited and energized about what we're doing right now. And then we are committed to exploration. I understand again that there's sometimes that concern over dual focuses. We'll talk to cash balance, we'll talk to the strategy of what we're doing and why we can actually achieve all of that over the next 6 to 12 months. The corporate structure has remained very tight. It's a huge part to the fantastic guidance of our chairman, Keith Jones. He's the former chairman of Deloitte Australia. He's an extremely experienced corporate operator. I have a corporate finance background myself, and we really focus on this. Together with Kudzai and Katrina running all of our cash burn down models, we really understand what we're about, what we're doing, and what we can do with the money that we have. And so cash balance 11.4 at the last quarterly, next one's coming up. The last number we put out into the public was over $8 million, and that remains the case as of this morning. And so we're in a very good position. I think it was Warren Buffett that said that when the tide goes out, difficult markets, you find out who's swimming without trunks on. And again, over the next 15 minutes or so, I'd like to explain to you why Coda's not only wearing trunks, but they're a pretty stylish set. So, we have the ability to do what we need to do and what we want to do over the next while. We consolidated Elizabeth Creek. Market didn't reward us for that as much as I maybe hoped we would, but sometimes rewards come later. I know from my experience over my career that if you're to look at doing something serious to commercialize an asset, whether it's through development or sale, it doesn't matter. 100% ownership is absolutely critical to that. And so this was the right thing to do. We will look to Torrens' assets as well. We're sort of going through a strategic process at the moment, and solid assets, but when you have Elizabeth Creek and Cameron River, it's really hard to look at diverting focus elsewhere. So again, we'll update on that as and when. Fewer than 125 million shares on issue. So again, we're relatively tightly held, and with that strong cash balance and workflow, we are stronger than we've ever been. I won't spend a lot of time on the boards, partly because I think they're all on this call, so it becomes a bit embarrassing. But what I will say, and Colin will talk briefly as well, is this is a very strong board. Keith, as you can see from the corporate structure, the consistent efforts to maintain that corporate discipline. You can see this, I believe, is a very well-run company corporately. We're not your average small cap, in my opinion. Colin, most senior geoscientist. Robin, we're writing feasibility. This is Robin and Paul's wheelhouse as well as Colin, in terms of making sure that feasibility is steered correctly. And I will talk to that again shortly. Copper, I can see there's a lot of names from some of the institutional funds on this call. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking to copper, but what I will say is, my training is as an economist and as a mineral economist primarily, and it's simple. It's supply and demand. We're in an absolutely very difficult bear market right now. I honestly don't know how long that's going to last, and I'll be very happy to discuss that in the Q&A or separately. I have my opinions, but the demand side of things, even in such a difficult market, copper is still hovering well above $8,000. Dr. Copper, as soon as the world caught a cold, Dr. Copper would be in the fours. And I think this is a real, there's a big supply side drive to this. The supply just isn't there. We're coming into issues in South America with supply, with workforce issues, increasing dwindling grades, and just generally this is a very, very challenging time for copper supply. And so I believe that forecasters like Goldman Sachs, RFC Ambient are doing a very, very solid job in understanding what that is. The EV over resource calcs, and I'll point towards Shaw and Partners, who undertake independent research on us. So for those of you who aren't aware, independent research, we don't have an influence in that. They take the information, they form their own opinion. And, again, you can see the EV over resource calcs, which are put out in those reports. And certainly Coda is very undervalued based on that. But all copper explorers, I think, have come off, and developers, to an unreasonable extent over the last little while. So I'll leave you to take your own risk opinion on that. But personally, I think the world is moving much towards greater electrification. And this is, a fundamental part of that. This is a good time to have a large copper asset. And make no mistake, 43 million tons at 1.84% in resource, primarily indicated resource, is, in my opinion, a very solid copper asset. This is one that's probably best read separately. So all I'll say is this is a track record of delivery over the last 2 years. We do work hard. We have a lot of energy for what we're doing. We've taken 280 million tons, copper equivalent to 1.1 million tons. Has the market rewarded us for that as much as I think it should yet? No, which means a re-rate is possibly coming. At what point does a re-rate generally come? When you demonstrate it's real. And we haven't done enough yet to do that. In about 2 slides time, I'll try and explain to you what we're doing to fix that. And, time is linear. Sometimes you've just got to do the work, and we are doing that work. We've also acquired the rights to Cameron River, which is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting targets I've ever seen. And we have hit some spectacular IOCG mineralization. I appreciate there has been some market reaction to the ongoing intercepts. I personally think that is the incorrect view, and the work is ongoing. The best place to find an IOCG is right next to IOCG mineralization that looks like intercepts from world-class IOCG deposits. And so again, I think that's something that we've done over the last year, taken completely greenfields ground and hit a major IOCG system in this area. So it proves targeting is good. It also proves the area is good. And then the main game, the feasibility study, which is really progressing very, very well. Most of you will have seen this slide. It's really here to show just the wealth of targets on this tenure. A mixture of early stage geophysics, things that haven't been drilled yet, power line, a couple of geophysical targets not on here as well, Elaine, but also JORC compliant indicated resources ×3, which is absolutely brilliant in terms of moving into a copper bull market. So to talk to those resources in a little bit more detail, I'm going to say one thing here and one thing only. If you take anything away from this presentation today, if this is not something that is well understood, and I'll take some criticism for not explaining it well enough perhaps, but we certainly try. I think we're throwing the kitchen sink at explaining the spatial relationship between EMMIE BLUFF and EMMIE IOCG. EMMIE BLUFF is a sediment-hosted copper cobalt resource sitting in a flat-lying unconformity, which effectively means sitting between two sandstones of a different age at 400 meters below the ground. 43 million tons, 1.84% copper equivalent. This is a large 800,000 ton copper equivalent resource. In terms of lateral extent, it's about the size of Kings Park in Perth. It's about the size of 2.5 Centennial Parks. It's huge. And that brings with it some fantastic opportunities and one or two challenges. But I often hear sort of the criticism, oh, it's at 900 meters, it's too deep to mine. No, it's at 400 meters with the topography that's 300 meters below the ground. That is very, very common in mining, and our mining study is increasingly advanced. EMMIE IOCG is the deeper mineralization. That is the iron oxide copper gold. So it is a different style of mineralization. It's a copper gold, not a copper cobalt. It is deeper. It is earlier stage. It is, without doubt, higher risk and also higher reward. IOCGs tend to be very large when you hit them. Unlike EMMIE BLUFF, which is laterally very extensive, IOCGs tend to be concentrated, thicker, and relatively smaller in terms of lateral extent, which makes them harder to hit. We've hit some really interesting and, frankly, very, very solid intercepts here. They are two quite different resources. They may or may start styles of mineralization. EMMIE BLUFF is a resource. They are probably part of the same copper system, although that is actually debatable depending on which geologist you talk to. And we are at the moment focusing primarily on development studies for EMMIE BLUFF and on ongoing exploration in EMMIE IOCG. So if I've labored that point, I apologize, but it's often something that gets missed quite badly when we talk to these. So talking to EMMIE BLUFF, this is the scoping study deposit. And this is the JORC compliant resource sitting at 400 meters below the ground. We've put in a good resource. That's the first step. So what next? First point is an underground deposit. Underground deposits are usually mine constrained. That is your challenge within an overall mining network. You're not mill constrained. You're unlikely in copper to be transport constrained. It's usually about getting the throughput. So the first thing is ensuring that you optimize the mining study, you optimize the resource to reserve extraction. And with a resource this size, and the grade tonnage curve plays in our favor as well. So, what the resource is, if you go back to the original resource statement, you look at that grade tonnage curve, you realize that, you drop the tonnage, you increase the grade, as always the case. This works in our favor. You optimize the extraction, and then you add the two existing open pittable deposits at Windabout and MG14. This starts to become a very compelling integrated whole when you have the 1.1 billion tons of copper equivalent, about 280,000 tons in open pittable resources under a little bit of dune sand, and then the remainder, about 800,000 tons in the underground deposit. So what are we doing about that? This is a new slide. And again, probably one of the most important slides in this presentation today. The first is, we are looking to deliver a scoping study, as all companies do in our situation. We're being a little bit vague on the timing because we'd rather under-promise and over-deliver, but we're talking about the midpoint of the second half of this year. So September, October, things are going very well, as you can see here. Geology is effectively 100% complete. We've delivered a resource. The mining study being the single most important part of this, and it is critical, is well advanced. We've done first pass mine design, first pass right through all of the planning stages. And now we're looking at opportunities to improve, optimize, and work through that. Now, because of the ASIC and JORC rules, this is not something where we're putting announcements out every day. And I'm not going to comment in any way, shape, or form about where we're at. I don't want anyone to read anything into that. This is about ensuring, and we really do try and do the right thing here with the ASIC and the ASX rules. This is about ensuring that when we put something out, it is the best it can possibly be with absolute reasonable basis. And I would like to think this will be well beyond the scope of a scoping study in terms of quality as well. The consultants do grumble repeatedly that that's what we're pushing for, and I make no apology for it. It's important work. It's actually an area that we have a lot of internal expertise on. Optimizing networks is what I wrote my personal master's thesis on when I did my MSc at WASM. Our geologist also has, and he also has that background as well in feasibility, and we're working with two groups of exceptional consultants. So with that, I'll move on, but understand that we are very advanced in this process and making sure that we have the best outcomes that we can as we work through that, integrating it with the open pits. Men processing is at 90%. We're well advanced on this. We've been working on it for 4 years. We understand what we're doing. EMMIE BLUFF is, obviously as we've finalized the resource, we've had to include that with Windabout and MG14. Again, I can't talk to the results, but we will very, very shortly. So, this will be primary news flow coming in the near future as we optimize and we work through all of the compliance matters and all of the reasonable basis to ensure that when we get this information out to you, it is really good information. Environmental, tailings, power infrastructure, again, this is advanced. There's about 30 different things that go into a scoping study. The majority of them are somewhere between 70 and 100% complete now. And as I say, we're moving on very well. So I haven't seen any questions come up yet. Please feel free to answer questions as we sort of come to the end. But with that, really, what I can say is we're on this. And I know it doesn't give a huge amount of evidence of beautiful, sexy news flow. But at the same time, the work is going on furiously. It's enjoyable. It's very much what we as a team have experience doing. And yeah, we're on it. Look, with that, Cole, I might just see if you're available to have a couple of thoughts on EMMIE BLUFF and also with the scoping study before we move on to the IOCG and Cameron River, just to wrap up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris, and hi, everyone. Listen, the way I look at these things is EMMIE BLUFF is a significant copper province and a significant system in what is elephant country. And the best place to look for elephants is in elephant country. There's a lot of copper floating around, and clearly the IOCG mineralisation and the more strata-bound Zambian style mineralisation is related. We've got a very strong handle on the geology and the resource at EMMIE BLUFF, and it's not my first scoping study. I've been involved in several, and all I can say is I think the guys are doing a pretty good job. I've heard people say it's too deep, it's too thin, and how do you produce a con product you can sell? Well, all I can say is that I'm seeing good progress towards those things, and I look forward to the point in which we can talk about it publicly. With respect to the IOCG, in my past, when you hit ore grade intercepts, you start to get excited. When every other hole's an ore grade intercept, you get very excited. And whilst we haven't been able to put together an economic accumulation of metal yet, arguably, it's not far away. You can't see it, but you can smell it. So I think the geos have done a terrific job here. The model's evolving. They are, historically quite difficult things to resolve, and I'm personally quite excited about the prospectivity of not only the EMMIE IOCG but other targets we have in the district. So, I think what attracts me to Coda is the amount of copper in this system and the potential, be it near term in the EMMIE BLUFF or in the sort of the discovery potential in the IOCGs. It's a very exciting thing. And before I move off it, I believe exploring in elephant country is the way to be. And Cameron River sits in the Isa Inlier, and there's coincident geophysical and geochemical anomalies there that just need to be drilled, drill-ready targets. And I'm sure Chris will talk about that going forward.
Thank you very much, Colin. You said it far better than I can in terms of looking for elephants. Elephant country is the right place to be looking. And let's address briefly the elephant in the room as well, which is what has happened over the last year and what that means for cash flow as well. So we've talked to the study. Studies are wonderful. Studies can move the dial, and the expensive bit, the drilling, the resource is done. For $100,000, you can move the dial on a study, and that's one of the reasons I love them. Say it's not Colin's first study, it's not mine, and it sure isn't Robin's. Again, understand that if anyone thinks that we're not doing the right thing as the exec team, our directors sure tell us, and we respect that opinion as well. We respect the experience. It's a great team to be working with on a study. Moving on to the IOCG, so in one hand, we've got a plus $8 million cash balance. Study should deliver a re-rate. What about the IOCG? Now, I got a few opinions on this. So geologically, I think Colin summarized it very well already. We're chasing conduits. We've pretty well proven now with the drilling that we have a first conduit over here on the west. We have a second really interesting conduit, which appears to be from a second pulse of mineralization or another pulse of mineralization because of the very strong silver grades, but the absence of gold in those assays, but again, very strong copper grades, so 2.7% copper. And then a third conduit up here. So what we know is that there's been these multiple pulses of mineralizing fluid. We understand that there are areas in the rock where that permeability is allowed all grade intercepts, but not, as Colin said, economic accumulation at this point. If you're looking for an economic accumulation, the best place to do it is right next to all grade intercepts, and that's really our focus. Now, cash burn, again, the elephant in the room. We have spent a pretty reasonable amount of money chasing this with drilling, and I believe we did the right thing. We raised that money. That money has gone into the ground. We reconcile our corporate expenses. I believe we have one of the lowest corporate cash burns around versus the money that goes into the ground. So we have followed that. Whether we had a cash balance of 2 or 20, to be honest, right now, the sensible thing to do is to use that drilling to then calibrate geophysics. If you just run geophysics blindly without drilling, it's very difficult to calibrate. There are new techniques, and that's the wonderful thing in this industry is that technology does move on very quickly. There are always some areas where everyone's a very slow adopter, usually operations, I find. They're not always. And in the geophysics area, this is one where you see a lot of innovation. And we will be deploying that over the next little while. Obviously, we will be locking in timings and announce that as and when we can. But really, that becomes a much lower cash burn. What you can do for $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 with geophysics is something that would take $20 million to do with drilling. So once you have that foundational drilling, you can move on. So the strategy, in my opinion, is the right strategy. We're chasing an understanding of where those conduits are, where the structures are, using the existing drilling to calibrate, again, against all grade intercepts, to find that thickness and effectively that revenue per vertical meter, which is so important to IOCG economics. And so again, in terms of cash burn, you will see that this is reducing markedly. And that is wonderful for us, but it's also the right strategic move. So again, I was going to say you couldn't have planned it better, but we did plan it this way. And this is this is the next steps as we come through. So I talked about difficult market. This is the right thing to be doing in that market. It's the right time anyway. And so it gives us a very strong position. If it's down there, I believe geophysics will find it. I believe there is something significant down there. The other great thing about geophysics, it allows you to cast your net wider. A drill hole is about the thickness of this coffee cup. Geophysics, you can go over kilometers and kilometers. So we can also look at the other targets that exist on this tenure. Central lane zone, one hole into it. Interesting, lots of alteration and smoke, but no fire. Con Ryan, Intercept Hill South, all very valid targets as well going forwards. So with that, I'm just going to, I've seen a question here. Can we make comparisons to Olympic Dam and Carapatina? Thank you for the question. I can, to an extent. I don't want to get a call from ASX after this. Again, I've said it before, we really do try and do the right thing. So what I can talk to is public domain. Every single IOCG is fundamentally quite different. People said to me, EMMIE BLUFF doesn't look like Olympic Dam. Well, no, it doesn't. But Olympic Dam doesn't look like Oak Dam West, which doesn't look like Carapatina, which doesn't look like Prominent Hill. What I can say is I can make comparisons to a couple of things. In terms of grade, the average mined grade over the last 7 quarters at Carapatina was around about 0.8 to 0.9% copper. And so when you look at the intercepts within, I'll just come back to that slide, within EMMIE IOCG, you can see that these are very strong intercepts. Now, no doubt, there are also higher grade intercepts. This is an average within Carapatina Olympic Dam, but the resource at Olympic Dam, from memory, is about 0.7, I think it's 0.67% copper. The Carapatina is about 0.5% copper overall. The reserve is 1.1% copper. And so what you're really looking for are these high-grade bornite zones, which are common to all IOCGs, or all 4 of the major ones, Carapatina, Oak Dam West, Prominent Hill, Olympic Dam, is common to EMMIE IOCG. We do have some significant thickness. The first major hole into Carapatina, the discovery hole, CAR 002, was a couple hundred meters with about 60, 70 meters in the 2% copper region. So you can see here, we've got some really solid intercepts that look very different to some of the also ran IOCGs like Camden and Fremantle Doctor. But, and this is where I need to make sure this is very much understood. This is over 2 to 3 loads within EMMIE IOCG, and we have not seen the continuous thickness, and we have not seen the overall scale, which is what has led deposits like Carapatina into where they are today. Now, with just 16 holes in this thing and geophysics going, it took over 50 holes to even get an understanding of Carapatina. We have the advantage of 1, understanding other models, and 2, the ability to do geophysics, which wasn't possible 15 years ago, 2009. And so, we believe that we're going to stack the cards in our favor. So you can never make a direct comparison to an operating mine and an exploration, but you can say that there are some very interesting intercepts here, and it's very much worthy of follow-up. Now, I've just seen another question, which if okay, I'll leave perhaps to the end, because I'll just get through the next couple of slides and then sort of pause for a few more questions, but I'll answer your question first, Oxygen. I'm going to talk briefly to Camera River. I often run out of time, just about 30 minutes in. Talking to Camera River, I'm sometimes tempted to put this first, but I suspect the conspiracy theorists would read something into that. And so, look, this is exciting. This is a fantastic piece of tenure. We saw this when it came to us a while ago. It's in the hands of a very experienced industry person who's looking for a team that gets things done and that you could trust to really do the right thing on this. And I believe we very much have. So we've got an 80% ownership structure, up to 80%, currently on 0. We expect to tick over the 51% after the next sort of major campaign, which kicks off in August. And these are some of the best targets I have ever seen in my career. These are very, very prospective targets. Now, they are, at this point, targets, and you have to calibrate your expectations in this part of the world, because high-grade rock chips, you can see here 12, 4, 5. I think we have some in our assay library over 20+% copper. These are, I'll refer you to those announcements for the purposes of compliance there. But these are fantastic. We've got coincident rock chips, coincident soils. We've got dipole-dipole, which is a form of IP, and then gradient array, which is another form. And you can see here we've done our best to take this dipole-dipole line across, which is this slice here, where you can see the whopping great conductor. It's a 49 millisecond conductor. To put that into context, that's twice the size of some recently drilled targets in the area that turned out to be very good indeed. With other companies, IP is what drives discovery. Now, that's a conductor. It doesn't mean it's full of copper. But when you have this much malachite on the surface, you have soils, you have structural mapping. The geologist we've been working with is an ultramarathon runner as well. So he has been just all over this area. And also has a PhD in this form of deposition. So, you know, this has had the legwork on it. And so all I can say here is I almost feel like I'm already overpromising. It's very, very prospective. I don't want to overpromise. I want to go drill it. And we'll be drilling this in August. We're just waiting for the final environmental approvals to come through. Everything else is sorted. And I'm very excited given what we see here with the coincidence anomalism, this is a very, very worthy target. The great thing about this is we're drilling 100 to 200 meter RC holes. It's cheap, it's low cost. This is not drilling 900 meter holes in the South Australian desert. This is drilling in an area with plentiful resources in terms of drilling, labs, good turnarounds for the most part, and relatively shallow RC drilling versus diamond. And so again, I love this form of strategy, which is having the ability to do things which can absolutely move the needle. You know, look at what's happened in the area with a company like Carnaby that is also not high cost. And in this kind of market, that's the kind of company that I want to be involved with and want to be investing in as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and sort of move over to questions. I hope over the last 20, 25 minutes or so, Kyle and I have given you an understanding of what we're doing, maybe conveyed some of the energy that is going into this. News flow is always difficult. I know there's always opinions on it, but one opinion is it's never enough, and I agree. We will be doing our best to make sure that speeds up. It's really a function of the work over the next few months. You know, we have Cameron River drilling kicks off in August, and results should come very quickly from that because of the form of drilling and the form of mineralization. We have the scoping study, so again, expect to see news flow coming from that. The IOCG geophysics is a slower burn, but we're sitting there with such a fantastic history of intercepts at that. And again, one thing that sometimes sort of baffles me a little bit is if someone was excited, 6 months ago, they should be a lot more excited now. And yet there has definitely been an element of certain shareholders, I think, sort of saying, okay, well, this hasn't developed quick enough. One, missing the fact that that's generally not how IOCGs are discovered unless you're very, very lucky. And second is the fundamental assets, the copper, cobalt, and Cameron River are stronger today than they have ever been. We have a cash balance greater than we did at listing. We have asset base far, far beyond where we dreamed of being when we listed. And so again, I hope that gives you an understanding of, one, the quality of the assets, two, hopefully the passion and input and the amount of work that goes into this from the board. And with that, I'll pause and sort of